And I want to echo Kim's welcome on a sunny Friday morning. This will be our last session with our host and teacher, instructor, I should say, Linda Walford. You will recall that Linda got her degree from Hope College, but then she went on and she got a master's and a PhD from the University of Chicago. She's been leading us in a analysis of John Kenneth Galbraith's The Great Crash of '29, written in 1955, which has held up amazingly well. And there are many lessons that we can learn and talk about and examine for what's going on today and looking back just a few years to the Great Recession of 2008. So as Kim said, if you would keep yourself muted either, well, sorry about that. Back up a minute, Diana. Linda's going to just talk and do some introductions and a few slides, and then we'll open it up for everyone. And when we open it up, you are very welcome to either type something into the chat or just simply unmute yourself and ask a question. It's just fine, and the whole morning will flow. So let's welcome Linda and thank her for this terrific course. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. On this sunny Friday, I'm happy to have you all in our group again this morning. And I'm going to start by saying that Thursday, just doing my due diligence, I'm driving around in Holland, and I thought maybe I'll pick up a copy of the Wall Street Journal just in case there's any heavy headline that I ought to be referring to tomorrow. So I go and buy a Wall Street Journal, and sure enough, here is the headline, Wall Street Journal from Thursday. And look at the headline here. Stock market sets records, optimism for 2021. All right, so we'll come back to that after we look at our slides this morning. But what do you think happened on Thursday? Of course, this came out Thursday morning. They have to decide on this in the wee hours of Thursday morning. So they come out with this headline, and what do you think happened the very next day? Of course, they're not saying day by day what they're predicting, but they are reflecting that. So let's go to our slides now and pick up where we left off last week. I have a little bit more presentation to do about the tendency, as Galbraith so effectively showed, the tendency to encourage people, no matter what the facts are, that the people who are in the know may know. And we talked about the fact that Holland had certain attractions like tourist attractions and tulip time that didn't necessarily suffer in the Depression, but they did have one bank robbery, and there is the staff of the bank that suffered the robbery in 1932 in Holland. But we covered Gresham's law a little bit last week. That is the law that when people are borrowing money to buy stocks, you're going to reach a point where they're selling their good stuff in order to cover losses in their bad stuff. And sure enough, he documents this a great deal in a number of cases that in what he's describing, and that the crash took place in different tiers. It wasn't one long downward slope. It was panic and pause, and a little rise and then down again. A lot of rattling around and then down again. So he's reminding us that the pattern was uneven when you looked at it day by day or week by week, but then when you look at it in the big picture, it's down. He's very discouraged and critical of the steps that Hoover took, of course, as he mentions throughout his discussion, that Herbert Hoover didn't understand what needed to be done. And although Hoover himself believed that there was a great deal of puff and fluff in the market and that it was headed down, he tried not to say that too much in public. So now we're looking at the aftermath and the effects of the Securities and Exchange Act of 1933 and 34, when from now on, from this point, Congress has asserted its muscle. Up until now, the New York Stock Exchange has decided that they should be a sovereign power, that they are a business that should run their own rules, be self-regulated, and from now on, after the Securities Exchange Act of 1933 and 34, the Congress was saying no, under Article 2 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to regulate commerce, interstate commerce. That's what this is. And so Congress has the power to regulate it. So the 6 points there are the things that the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Securities and Exchange Act of 1933, and then the SEC, an agency that was formed to enforce that, has been inactive ever since then. This building is, I believe, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York City. Pretty big, huh? Now, in the crash, of course, as Galbraith says, the public in their congressional hearings starting in 1932 wanted to find a culprit. They wanted to find out who did this. What can we do to make sure it never happens again? Aren't we looking at congressional investigations right now that are saying that about what happened in the Capitol on January 6th to find out who did this? And specifically, not just to deal with the actual characters who stormed the Capitol, but who planned it, who was behind them, who maybe wasn't there at the Capitol, but was behind the scenes doing it. So they're going to be looking for culprits and trying to understand what happened. So their key, the usual suspects were these four, as Galbraith points this out in his chapter. First of all, they looked at the banks. So with extended detail, he describes the fate of Albert Wiggin, who was the head of Chase Bank and also a speculator and an operator. And he spends about 3 pages there discussing in detail what Wiggin actually did. As Wiggin became a symbol of evil, not just one character who did something wrong, but a symbol of who were the culprits. So in other words, they were looking for banks that had been at fault. And then they chose, he also deals with Charles Mitchell, who was another insider who did short sales buy-ins and tax dodges. And I believe that you'd have to look again at the details that Galbraith gives to find out, did they pay a price and did they go to jail or did they pay huge fines or what? The second category, but in 1934, in his inaugural speech, Roosevelt signals that the New Deal is going to have a no-nonsense attitude toward regulating the stock market because they think that they have found some things that were wrong. He promises to drive the money changers from the temple. Where did he get that image?
Bible.
The Bible. Jesus drove the money changers from the temple. So he's actually taking a very strong moment in Jesus' life where he drive the money changers from the temple. Second, they're looking for market operators as a symbol of evil, and he discusses a couple of those. Then he suggests that Wall Street itself was going to take the blame, that the American public in general after the early 1930s was going to think of Wall Street as a den of thieves, as just the rich making the rich richer, and something that's against the public good. Page 159 discusses Wall Street. Now, behind that, he mentions that, of course, at this time in the 30s and long before that, capitalism itself was blamed by some. So communists and socialists were saying capitalism itself is a system that's going to create markets like this, and the Great Depression is an example of what happens in capitalism. This is a picture of Chase Bank. And this is National City Bank. So you can see, again, we were talking earlier about the architecture of all the columns and the high arches suggesting stability, the sky's the limit, and the domes and temples of capitalism. So Chase at National City, he discusses at length. And then he does discuss at length what Uncle Sam is going to do. And Galbraith says that it became the New York Stock Exchange itself that was taking a good deal of blame for no good reason. And one of the themes that I see in this book as a whole is that Galbraith believes that the New York Stock Exchange itself, as an exchange, behaved beautifully in the crash because none of their members had to go belly up. The companies or the members that were the brokerage houses that were members of the New York Stock Exchange did not have to fold or go out of business. And pages 159 through 67, he goes at length, look at that, 12 pages he spends describing the career and the so-called crimes of Richard Whitney, who was a terrible businessman, but at the time of the crash, he was an official representing the New York Stock Exchange. And did Whitney's sins stain the entire New York Stock Exchange? And did Richard Whitney, who eventually went to Sing Sing and was one of the only culprits who actually wound up with the jail term as Uncle Sam moved in? And how many of you, when we get to the discussion, if you remember the long discussion of Richard Whitney and how he's portrayed, can you agree with Galbraith that it seems that the New York Stock Exchange in particular did not deserve to take the hit? He does show that scholarly forecasters dropped right and left. They were dropping like flies because most of them had been wrong. Lawrence, Professor Lawrence, who had been quoted quite a few times at Princeton, he just disappeared. The Harvard Economic Society had, interestingly, had a long history of singing the blues and predicting doom all through the 1920s. People were sick and tired of the Harvard Economic Society saying that the stock market was going to fall apart, all during the 1920s. Then in 1929, the Harvard Economic Society changes its mind and starts trying to explain that things are going to turn right around. And so after the crash, the Harvard Economic Society is never heard from again. Irving Fisher, one of the scholarly forecasters who was totally wrong, after it was all over, wrote a new book to explaining himself why it happened. And Galbraith quoted Irving Fisher in this ridiculous paragraph. As Fisher tries to explain what happened, it was the psychology of panic. It was mob psychology. It was not primarily that the price level of the market was unsoundly high. The fall in the market was very largely due to the psychology by which it went down because it went down. Okay, that's his best effort to explain it. And he also says, Fisher also had said earlier that one of the reasons that the stock exchange was so much a mark of prosperity and that America was enjoying so much prosperity was because of prohibition was keeping everybody sober. And then he still says during the 1930s that one reason the stock exchange is still trustworthy was because of the healthy effect of prohibition. So, but he does point out that two survivors were Professor Dice in Ohio, who was still respected all through the 30s. Sorry about the typos here in this page. And Goldman Sachs, he says, although Goldman Sachs had spun off some of these investment trusts that he showed were such shadow trusts that just went completely belly up and went to zero. Nevertheless, Goldman Sachs went back to their policies of rectitude and conservatism, and of course is still a very respected company today. However, we can come back to Goldman Sachs later in the discussion if some of you know the later history of Goldman Sachs. And the time came at a later time when Goldman Sachs had egg on their face big time. They had really ruined their reputation by something that happened. And who did they call in to be the person from the far west who had to come in and help Goldman Sachs clean up their act? Now, let me go through some old sayings that we'll touch on we have a lot of old sayings in our culture that have to do with the love of money. Well, it's not money is the root of all evil. That's what people usually quote. But the actual old quote is, the love of money, in other words, greed or money at all expenses, is the root of all evil. And we said before, a fool and his money are soon parted, us implying that the wise and their money are not soon parted. What makes a person wise, or the mark of wisdom, is the ability to be able to have your money grow. Stitch in time saves 9 stitches for planning ahead. A penny saved is a penny earned, said Benjamin Franklin. Actually, a penny saved is more than a penny earned, because a penny earned has to have taxes paid on it, and a penny saved, you already paid the taxes. So a penny saved is better than a penny earned in a way, and that's a profound insight too. How about the old saying, God helps those who help themselves? That's an interesting paradox there that has to do with money. Slow and steady wins the race. How about the old song from the Sunday school song, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine? If Roosevelt pointed to Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple, the I'm going to let my little light shine is a common Sunday school theme, and it relates to what parable of Jesus? About not burying something in the ground, but making it productive. The parable of the talents. Jesus told a parable of the talents where a master has several servants and gives them each a certain amount of money. And now a talent in that time was a coin. It's not like we think of it, talent, as being, I have music talent or I have artistic talent. It was money. Talent was money. And one servant, the servant who receives praise at the end, is the servant who did not bury his talent in the ground in order to save it, but went out and seeded something with it, went out and made it productive. So that interesting talent parable is being reflected as a life attitude of whatever I can do, I'm going to let my little light shine. But not hiding your light under a bushel, but set it on a hill. There's another statement from the Bible, set your light on a hill to be a beacon of light. There are just points in the New Testament where we see one little thing that could lead to an attitude that you could see has to do with management of money. What about the idea that all people who wish may participate in the stock market, subject only to reasonable rules of what it takes to participate? Now, a lot of fuss is being made right now about everyone flooding into the market because the people who are doing the GameStop thing and the Bitcoin thing are saying, well, in the past, only the rich could play in the market. And now we want to democratize that so the ordinary people can come in. I wonder if it isn't true that through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, people could go into the market if they wanted to. But they were so disillusioned that most ordinary people in the middle class did not do that. They did other things with their money. Now, how about this statement from Ralph Waldo Emerson? A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. So if you really have critical thinking, that means you're capable of contrary thinking, of always questioning it and being skeptical about whatever it is that the authorities are handing out or that you heard in the street. You're always questioning things. And if you always try to do exactly the same thing, it doesn't show the creative mind that Emerson is trying to describe. And then again, the fact that our underlying constitution and our government, our democratic government, ensures that Congress does have the power, which in turn is regulated or reflecting the will of the people and has the role of promoting the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. And I want to point out that when the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was chosen by Jefferson to go into the Declaration of Independence, he was modifying an earlier phrase that had been life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And Jefferson, being this American, and substituting the people's deep desire for happiness instead of saying property. But earlier it had been the idea that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. The communists and socialists developed the idea that capitalism itself was a collection of ideas of thieves, murderers, kidnappers, destroyers of native cultures, crooks, embezzlers, and marauders in native lands to come and steal the wealth of the indigenous peoples. Assumed that Americans did overcome their mistrust of Wall Street as the symbol of evil. How and why did they do that in our lifetimes? Was it because, despite what had happened in the 30s, and despite these ideas that were being presented by contrary thinkers of the dangers and evils of capitalism, that Americans still came up with their belief in capitalism and the markets that result from that? What is it that seniors see as needed and as the more productive about the nature and purpose of a market like the New York Stock Exchange? And then does Galbraith have a final answer to our questions? What can we expect from here? Or what do we need to learn from his history? And then the final question, if capitalism stinks, compared to what? Here is a picture of Galbraith. Now he looks kind of stern here, doesn't he? He looks like he's challenging you. He says toward the end, as he's concluding the book, he says, military historians don't have to tell what is going to happen in the future. They're not challenged with questions. You don't expect a historian to predict the future. Only economic historians are badgered about making prophecies. So economics is taken more seriously than history by some people. But Galbraith says very specific and personal misfortune awaits those who presume to believe that the future is revealed to them. So he's saying thanks but no thanks to the invitation or implication that people are reading this book in order to get prophecies about the future or about markets now from what Galbraith has described. Then he says on 189, no one can doubt that the American people remain susceptible to the speculative mood. And this is Galbraith in 1997 writing this way, to the conviction that enterprise can be attended by unlimited rewards in which they individually were meant to share. So that gives a hint of where Galbraith is coming out at the end of the book. Here are pictures of who can tell me who these two people are.
Gates and Buffett.
All right, Gates and Buffett, who are, by the way, very good friends. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are very good friends. Not expecting to be, Gates didn't expect to be a good friend of Buffett the first time that he met him, but they did meet at an arranged meeting by, I think, Gates's mother. And she always says, sometimes mother does know best, because when they met the first time, they talked for 20 minutes and knew that they wanted to talk for hours, and they ended up spending about 6 hours together that day. So Buffett and Gates are in contact all the time, share many concepts about investing in common. And Buffett, in fact, has given to the Gates Foundation a tremendous portion of his wherewithal, of his nest egg, shall we say, his many billions will go to the Gates Foundation, and some already has gone to do good in the world. All right, two other figures that people turn to today for straight talk or trust to give them straight talk. Who are these two characters?
Oh, I know that one.
Is that Yellen?
That's Janet Yellen, okay.
And Orman.
And
Susie Orman.
Susie Orman. I think, don't you? I think that Susie Orman is a wonderful educator of the public on all kinds of questions to kind of help raise the financial literacy of people by doing it in a way that people can latch onto and appreciate. She's done books and she also does lectures, and she's very popular. And I'm not sure Janet Yellen is popular, but she is highly trusted by a great majority of the American public to be a good director of the Treasury. This is Benjamin Graham, the character who influenced Warren Buffett in the early days and who hired Warren Buffett after Buffett had gotten his degree at Columbia under Benjamin Graham. The intelligent investor, I noticed yesterday, is now today among the 100 top sellers of Amazon. So apparently many thousands of people are buying this book last year and this year to try to get a handle on what is wise investing. That has never gone out of style. So I think that's interesting. They're not all going after Bitcoin and GameStop. They're trying to understand the principles of value investing. Now here is a picture of the S&P 500 from 1950 to 2016. So look at this a minute and see what it makes you think of. Here's 1950, and I think we said earlier that the stock market did not reach its 1928 level again until 1951. So if this graph were extended to the left, you would just see down there the big drop in 29 and a very slow recovery to 1951 of where it had been before. But look at that in proportion to what we have here. And what we have here is the path of the stock market of the S&P 500 from 1950, right about the time that it had recovered from the Depression, until it's at 2,200 in 2016. And where is it now?
It's over that.
It's way over that. It's up around 3,000, isn't it? So it's half again, way up from 2016. So what's not to like? When we look at this overall picture, it kind of clarifies what is meant by investing for the long haul. So some of the things I think I'm interested in to hear some discussion about is, did your parents invest, and how did they invest, and how did it turn out? How and why did they invest? And if they didn't invest in stocks, then what else did they do to husband their money and make it grow, to not just put it in a bank account? And what did you expect in 1960 if you were growing up in 1960 as I was? I turned 18 in 1960. What did you expect in 1960? And what did you expect in 1980? And what did you expect in 1995? Now today, exchange traded funds are popular. That's like buying an index. Yes.
George had his hand up.
Okay, yes.
Well, you were going to comment. My dad didn't believe in stocks. He either wanted to own a business or land.
All right. And I think that would reflect my father and grandfathers, my father and my mother and my grandparents as well, because my grandfather would have felt that he understands land. And if you're going to own a business, you're going to own a business in something you know something about. And Buffett is always saying, invest in what you know something about. Invest in something you understand. So, and did that overall, George, would you, do you think that those decisions showed wisdom?
Considering what he knew, yes. We have to remember that in 1929 or 30, we had the scandal of scandals in Holland that impacted a lot of people's emotional perspectives at that time, with the scandal over Holland furnace, which really didn't go away for 30 more years. But anyway.
Okay. That is an amazing story. And even I, though I haven't spent most of my life in Holland, I know that Holland furnace was just a horrible ghost standing behind everybody's consciousness. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? What was the scandal?
I don't know the details. I only know of the finish.
Okay. Well,
some of us would love to know the details, because we didn't live here.
All right.
I think it's in the book of the history of Holland.
Okay. I think it was basically people coming around to your door, knock on your door and ask if your heating if you would like to have a free furnace inspection.
Uh,
Now that the heating season is here, would you like somebody to really
No, that's
inspect
the
your
last,
furnace?
Linda, that's the end. There was a stock scandal before that.
Okay.
Linda, John Buttry had his hand up.
Oh, good. Okay.
As far as I know, my parents did not invest in the stock market, but my wife's dad did. And he made more money in the stock market than he had in many years of business as a pharmacist. And he tended to invest in pharmaceutical stocks, and he invested individual stocks, not groups of stocks.
Okay.
And he made a lot of money. And it was, again, something he knew about.
Yep.
And
So
made a
he
lot of
was
money on that.
he was following Warren Buffett's rule of thumb as well.
Exactly.
Invest in what you know something about. He had a basis for believing that one pharmaceutical company was better than another one, or who had the products that were most worthy of investment.
Sometimes when the stock market went down a little bit, my wife would say, "Hey, Dad, you lost a lot of money today." Well, I can still eat.
I can still eat. That's right.
Sue,
Back on the Holland furnace, there's a local book, or a book was written, and I can't remember the name of the author, but you might still be able to get it at Reader's World, but it's a book on the history of Holland furnace. And it had to do with, Holland furnace was started by two gentlemen. One was kind of the marketing guy, and one was the sort of brains behind the operation from an engineering standpoint. And it's a long story, but the bottom line is the second generation got in control, and the sort of the integrity went out the window. And
Okay.
they were anyhow, it's a really good book if you can find it. It's History of Holland Furnace. I can't remember if it's there's been a couple authors in the area that have done a lot of history books. Anyhow, it comes in paperback, and it's a great read. Well, at least for me, in terms of understanding a lot of the history and places in Holland and so forth, and what the scandal was all about. It's a great read.
Okay, would you send that, give Kim a little note on that, and we'll get that out to you, the name of that book that'll describe the Great Holland Furnace fiasco.
Okay.
For those interested in Holland history.
Sounds like could be something Randy Vandewater did.
Uh-oh. Oh, that the book is?
Yeah.
Okay. Randy Vandewater wasn't the culprit, I assure.
No. He's quite a Holland historian.
oh, let's not start rumors here. Sue, you had your hand up.
Well, I think it's interesting. My first husband's grandfather invested in any company in Wisconsin that survived the 1929 crash, and he did very well with that. My mother invested with a broker in Arizona. She had been a nurse most of her life, and when she passed away, she had quite a large estate. I think what happened to the stock market in the 80s when we started having 401ks, remember we had to choose different investment things because we no longer were going to invest in pensions with our jobs. And that's when I started putting whatever the maximum I could and I was also a nurse, into these things in 401ks. And then as you change jobs, you either move that with you or whatever, and then you had to choose. So what I found, as Susie Orman mentioned, I have not done well with investment counselors. And that's, I do better by myself. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, I think that knowing what you want to invest in and doing it yourself may be a little bit better because there's an inherent interest in the people that are investing for you that they also make money, and it's not always in your best interest. So that's sort of been my experience. I've had one really good bond broker in Chicago that I really loved and enjoyed, and that was a good experience. But it's interesting. We really have to be careful about who we trust to handle our money because they don't always have our best interests at heart.
Okay, I agree with that. I agree with everything Sue Bolander said. Any other comments on that about the apparent difficulty?
I have my hand up too. I'm another
Hold on,
scoop.
there is a, real quick, Linda, there's a couple things, or I guess maybe just one question in the chat. It's who warned about unbridled capitalism and what was their remedy?
Well, I wonder if we could say that Galbraith implicitly warns against unbridled capitalism because he does believe that the government should have a regulatory role, I think, don't you? I think that overall, Galbraith does not disagree that Congress rightfully has some control over the markets. It's sort of double talk to say you don't believe in unbridled capitalism, because capitalism is based on the market being free of manipulation, free of Uncle Sam coming in and saying, well, here are the prices at which things can sell, and that's it. Or even the government coming in and dictating what the value of the dollar is against other currencies. That also is not a free market. So if you believe in free markets, then it's a question mark as to which Uncle Sam or other regulator or the government, governments of various third world countries you better believe they control the markets. And the Hong Kong stock market was just exposed to huge new taxes that are going to affect it. So I can't answer the question about any one economist who talked about unbridled capitalism, but certainly there are a lot of commentators out there, including Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who do believe that regulation plays an important part in the markets.
I have two things, according to what you just spoke of. What about the unbridling of a child when they're learning to walk? And my father, I think he thought of his future by coming back to Holland after World War II with his family that he had started after coming back when he was in Chicago, and starting again in an area he was familiar with because he had gone to college up in Muskegon and lived in Holland before the war. And he saw a place here where he could go ahead.
He saw Holland as a place that was going to be hospitable for his endeavors. He saw Holland as a good place to try to make something go, right?
Absolutely. And he was originally from the Crystal Falls up the peninsula.
Okay.
Excuse me, but if you're not speaking, I would all appreciate if you would mute yourself because we're getting a little bit of interference. Thank you. Who's ever laughing?
Somebody needs to put their mute on. Maybe
I
just keep
it's the classroom. Kim's mic is on.
Maybe Kim
You
can
too.
turn that off.
Hi, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Very good.
No.
Okay, next
As long as I
question.
have one in the archives and one in the library, we're good. So you can have them.
Next question.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was muted and I wasn't. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Somebody came in the office to pick something up.
Okay. Is there another question? Is there anything else in the chat that we?
No, just warnings to me about my mute. So sorry, you guys.
All right. So let's do a little bit of fun and games here. Just on, we're all concerned, I think, about what we mentioned last week, that the level of public knowledge or the knowledge that we wish people would have before they start risking their money in the stock market. You don't just go in there and start throwing money around. So let's do two things first. If you flip a coin and the first 8 flips come up heads, what's the probability that the next one will come up heads? And I'm going to give you 4 choices.
50-50.
Number 1, 50-50. Number 2, very slightly higher for tails. And number 3, a very good bet that the next toss will be tails.
50-50.
Correct, 50-50. All right. We're not dummies. We're not likely to lose money on that one. All right, now here's another one. Deck of 52 cards is dealt. It's very well shuffled, and the first 7 cards that are laid down are all red. What are the chances that the next card will be red? A, 50-50. B, very lightly less than, more or less, depending on what you're betting on. Because in your hand are 26 minus 7 or 19 red cards, and you have 26 black cards still there. Your next draw will have a slightly better chance of being black, but should you invest a lot of money on those probabilities?
No,
No,
There's a greater chance it'll be black.
there is a greater chance it will be black. Okay, and so to understand the difference between those two things is important, isn't it? That's important logical knowledge about what you're dealing with. The coin flip is always 50-50. The one with the cards, as we all know from playing any card game that involves counting the cards or knowing what's still out, is affected by the diminishing supply of the red cards. Now, let's say that your rich uncle died and left you $15,000 that you didn't expect. We all have established that we're not going to put it in the bank and just spend it, and we're not going to put it in the bank and just leave it there, collecting practically no interest. But your choices are to put it in treasury bills, US Treasury guaranteed bonds that carry a slight interest rate for 20 years, or invest in a bond that is not a T-bill, but some sort of corporate bond or bond. Next, invest in a well-chosen stock using a rationale meant for the long term, or invest in an indexed fund.
It's impossible to answer.
Okay.
It depends on the person's circumstances.
Okay, good, because why?
Well, everybody's
Depends on the person's-
situation is different.
Okay,
It may be
how much they
critical.
have to work with, whether they can afford to, what their risk tolerance is, where they want to allocate the risk and how much risk they are going to do. Now let's say that at a certain point with your $15,000, it's maybe 2 years ago last year, or maybe the year before, the pandemic is coming. The big pharma companies are trying to develop a vaccine, and you have a feeling, or that sooner or later, one of these 3 companies, or maybe all 3 of them, is going to have a vaccine that will that will help with so you have Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J. Now, first of all, would you eliminate this entirely for any reason, that you're not going to speculate in vaccine stocks? Or B, you're going to try to figure out which one of those 3 companies has better management, lower debt, farther along in the process, et cetera, any other rationale you can think of. Would you invest some money in each one of them, thinking of this like a sector? Well, the vaccine market's going to be good. One of these 3 is likely to produce a really good vaccine. I'm going to put money in all 3. Or choose the underdog. And let's pause a minute on that about choosing the underdog. Let me hear some comment about this. How many would not even start to get into the vaccine speculation market at all? How many would go for some idea that, yes, the country's going to need a vaccine. It'll have a huge, huge application when we find it. And so this is a reasonable investment.
Yes.
Okay.
Portion of it, just a portion though.
Just a portion though, just a portion of your money. You wouldn't want to go with the whole 15,000. You wouldn't want all of your rich Uncle Harry's money to go into a vaccine speculation.
No, only from what I've read and learned, what has happened in previous government contracts with in other industries, completely separate from pharmaceutical. But we've seen what's happened with White Industries, Rio, with government contracts. So that's why I'd only do a portion.
Okay. Is there any other? Go ahead.
It depends on individual circumstances. If I'm Warren Buffett, I put 15 grand into pharmaceuticals.
Okay, but let me tell you that I'm glad you brought up Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett did buy Pfizer, but he bought it very early. He bought only Pfizer and he sold it last year. So he sold out of Pfizer. Now, he is a big investor in pharmaceuticals, but between investing in a vaccine and what he invested in has to do with kidney disease. Which one is going to still be here in 5 years? The need for a COVID vaccine or kidney disease?
Kidney
More
disease.
likely kidney.
So even though the whole world needs to be vaccinated.
Both.
Pardon?
I think both. From what I've read recently, we will have to have a booster vaccination every year, every other year.
Okay. Now, I mentioned that sometimes when you're considering different examples of the same thing or the same area, Warren Buffett recommends some contrary thinking. So that would indicate buy the underdog. Look for the underdog. In other words, look for the one that's being undervalued in the marketplace. Other people don't think it's the winner. How would you do that? Well, maybe Johnson & Johnson is the underdog in a way because they're the third one into the party. They're the third one to the party. Their vaccine is slightly lower in its efficacy. It's like 62%, whereas the others are like in the 90s. So choosing the underdog would mean putting your money into Johnson & Johnson. Any other reasons that, now just given that all three companies have a similar profile, but they don't. They may be differing on how much money they have borrowed or what other products they have that support their profit base. That's not just a vaccine company. That would be another reason to choose Johnson & Johnson. What
Was
else would be?
Johnson & Johnson tied in with the opioid problem?
Not that I know of.
How about Pfizer?
I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Okay.
Linda, there's a question to please describe ETFs.
Okay, let's come back to the interesting question of how do people choose a sector but then decide on a stock that would be the one? And some people in our group are saying the successful investors they know buy a stock where they know what they're doing. But Sue Bolander gave a strong affirmation that sometimes you can do better on your own than with an investment guru that you have access to. An exchange traded fund means you're buying a basket of stocks which the person selling them, the bank or broker selling them, has assembled to be a microcosm of the market as a whole. And so they're trying to assemble such a broad range of stocks that you're really participating in the stock market as a whole. And they are noticing here that if you could just get into the average of what the stock market is doing, you'd do just fine because these are the averages right here. Look at it go up. So over any long period of time, if you could just go into the average of what's happening in the market, you would have a long-term winner. You would have long-term success.
Exchange traded funds can also be sector focused.
Yes, they could be only bonds or only industrials or that type of thing. So now you have
or pharmaceuticals or technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, okay. So don't we see the multiplication of different examples of exchange traded funds, because this is a direction that investors are going now. Is the price the same as the value?
No.
No. Correct. Why? Because the market is crazy. That's why I put the crazy man up here. The market in the short term is off. The market in the short term does not have a perfect coherence of the price and the value. Some things are undervalued and some things are wildly overvalued. And that fact is where value investing finds its proper investment. So it's in a way for the investor, it's a good thing that the price is not the value. Mr. Market is characterized by Benjamin Graham in his book as a psychotic lunatic in the short term, but discovers the actual value in the long term. So buy and therefore, I think Galbraith himself represented a buy and hold value investor over the long term, probably, from the little clues that we have in the introduction and in what he says. What other questions do you have? Let's go back to this. If you look at the plunge in 1987, here's 1980 here. Between 1988 and 90, you see a plunge, but it's so tiny in the whole scheme of things that it's just a little blip on the screen. And yet, how many of you remember the downfall of 1987, the drastic drop in the market of 1987, where people couldn't believe how it had gone down? Now, Sue Bolander mentioned the problem or question about how advisors are paid. Looking back in time, there was a time when every trade cost way more than it does today. So they were making fees on each trade that was done. Over the years, especially with the arrival of Schwab in the marketplace as a new broker, what's called discount brokers, where the brokers or the advisors were no longer making the majority of their income or livelihood off of churning the account, creating a lot of trades, but were in effect going to have to be paid more directly for their advice, not for the transactions they could generate. Now, several times in the book, Galbraith refers to the greater fool theory. And this is an important weekend in investing, because when we look at this title, this was the headline on Thursday, but what happened in the market on Thursday? It went down. And I think when I read this article, when I got to the end, I thought, I'll bet you that the New York Times editors edited this article because they were afraid that putting that headline in the middle of the Wall Street Journal for that day, that the journal was going to live to regret it. And so here's the very end of the article. After telling you all the reasons that the stock market is in line to go up in 2021, they added 2 paragraphs at the end of the article. Roaring markets might seem to suggest that investors are flush with cash to deploy and pricing in a better future. The reality might be less exciting. Investors in a low rate world often overcommit to perceived opportunity and live to regret it. So they've put in a warning at the end of the article. And low rate means borrowing, that it points to borrowing the money that you're going to invest. By the same token, we may not fully appreciate the ways that human behavior changed permanently because of the pandemic. Now, that's an interesting suggestion by the New York Times, that the pandemic has permanently changed human behavior. What could they mean by that? That may be enough to temper any boom the economy experiences in the coming years. Quote, there's this view that we're going to embark on a massive spending party and life will go back to normal, said David Rosenberg, a longtime Wall Street economist who is president and chief economist of Rosenberg Research. I just don't believe that. End of article. Rosenberg saying, everybody thinks there's going to be a huge party coming up in 2021 because everybody has money, everybody's going to spend it, and the stock market is going to continue to just explode upward. I just don't believe that. The other thing that's happening this weekend that's apropos is every year about this time of year, a certain letter comes out that investors consider very important. This is Warren Buffett's annual letter to his shareholders. Warren Buffett is a very good writer. He's sardonic, humorous, and accessible in the way that he writes. And so every year about this time, and if you really need to know more about this, then you need to get up very early on Saturday morning and have your cup of coffee and get ready to go online at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the annual letter of Warren Buffett is going to be released. And I'm making fun of that idea, but is there anybody in our group now who is going to be paying attention to Warren Buffett's annual letter? See what it says, see what he expects, see how he looks at the market.
Of course.
Of course, of course. Why?
Well, it's always, no one knows what the future is going to hold, but it's certainly the wise person that searches out different points of view, hears different points of view, and then evaluate for themselves what they think is a correct approach for their future.
Okay, exactly. So, and that would characterize probably the HASP scholars who have been around for a while and have had to make choices about what to do with whatever money has been saved, got over the unreasonable fears that may have prevailed in Holland after the 1930s, that because Holland Furnace was a complete bust and harmed many people, therefore the world is full of companies that aren't what they were decked out to be, and mistrust that makes them fearful of the stock market. How do you feel about the statement today?
Commenting on the last thing.
Go ahead.
It depends upon where you are financially, how fluid your money is.
Yes.
Some people didn't start out with much money and weren't able to invest it to make it grow much, and therefore don't have the liquidity to be affected by putting money in special places.
Mhm.
And therefore they may put trust, as I do, in a manager for their retirement funds.
In a manager for the retirement funds. Mhm. My mother put what money she had in the hands of an investor here in Holland that she knew, somebody she knew through church. But he put her into Enron and she lost a third of what she had. And she did run out of money before the end of her life. So she never put blame on him. She just felt that, well, Enron happened to so many, many millions of people that there really wasn't any way that you can blame any guru for having put the money of an 80-year-old woman into Enron. Is there any comment about that?
Well, my only comment would be if in fact an advisor put a third of her money in any one stock, that would probably could be questioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not enough diversification. Now that brings up another point about diversification. Benjamin Graham talked about concentrated diversification. Well, that's an oxymoron if I ever heard one. What is concentrated diversification, as he meant it? I mean, at various times, Warren Buffett has not worried about diversification particularly. He's had huge positions in a limited group of things. He wasn't really trying to diversify that much, although overall, Berkshire Hathaway has been very diversified over a period of time.
Well, you know, you talk about ETFs, and talk about diversified concentration. You can buy an ETF that invests in technology, and within that ETF, there might be 30 or 40 technology companies.
Yes.
So you may be concentrated in an industry, but you could be very diversified in terms of the companies within that industry.
Okay, so then if you hit a period in the marketplace where tech stocks are taking a particular hit, then your diversification, you suffer through that whole range of that particular ETF, but then that would be an argument for having ETFs in different sectors of the market.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you wouldn't put all your money into technology, even if it was diversified. You'd spread it across a whole array of different investment opportunities.
Now, I noticed over the years that investment advisors have very often developed percentages that they think that as we age, people should observe. And it turns out to be a larger and larger and larger proportion of bonds as you get older. That when you're younger, you can afford to risk more money because you have more time to recover if things go bad. But as you get older, you should own a larger and larger percentage of bonds. That is a particularly unfortunate overall theory from my point of view for our age cohort, because since we were in our 60s in the like 2008, 2010, so forth, 2015, the bonds were so low that you just couldn't afford not to be in more equities. So I think the aging population in the last 20 years has been over directed into bonds. I'll stick my neck out. I'm not an expert on this. I'm just throwing out ideas. I thought about it and read some stuff, but I think that people our age have been over directed into bonds in the last 20 years, and were wise if they stayed more in equities with a reasonable rationale and good advising about what to be in. Let's hear some comment about that.
Well, what you're talking about is called asset allocation.
Yeah.
Those are the various formulas over the years that have been espoused depending on age. And you bring up the correct point. That's a starting point, but you have to consider not only market conditions at the time and foreseeably, but also the individual client's circumstances, their ability to take risk, their risk tolerance. There's an awful lot of factors at play, but I think generally I would tend to agree with you. To blindly just go into fixed income as a higher and higher percentage as you age is probably not the right thing to do completely, certainly given where interest rates are today.
Right. So if you, at the time that I was first making some of these decisions, I had a home mortgage that was on my mortgage money, I was paying 7%. And the bond market was going to pay me 5% or 4% as an investment. Well, come on. I know that if I'm borrowing money on my home and paying 8% on my mortgage, and then I'm buying a bond that's only paying 4%, that's the wrong way around. You can't do that. You'd be better off to not buy the bond and pay off your house.
Of course.
Another observation that I heard along the way, and I tend to agree with, was the statement, your home is not an investment. Now, why do people say that, and what do they mean? Your home is not an investment. Well, I think the underlying idea was your home costs money to own. It's not producing money, so it's not a productive thing. It may go up with the market, but is your home an investment?
I have another comment about bonds.
Yeah.
You don't have to just buy bank bonds with a certain fixed interest rate. I had corporate bonds, and I started buying them in about I don't know, 2000 maybe. And for 10 or 15 years, they were very, very productive. I have GMAC bonds that were paying about 10%. It wasn't until the cars thing went really bust that was bad. But I was making about $12,000 to $15,000 a year income on my bonds. And I had my bond broker started purchasing them over a 2-year period. He didn't want to invest all at one time. He said because of the rates of things. So when he would find something that was good, we would buy it. And we usually bought $10,000 at a time.
All right.
So it's bonds, there are different ways to buy bonds. Now I did get stuck when I had Tribune bonds that went bust. Sam Zell came in and depleted that whole company and went bankrupt. I had Kodak camera bonds that went bust. I had some car manufacturing things actually in Michigan that went bust. But over the course of the years, I lost some money, but also the income that I made and made up for it, some other things that just worked out. So anyway, it's my experience with bonds were pretty good. Now, right now I have some oil and gas bonds that lost $27,000
yeah.
last year.
You
So that's
mentioned-
not so good. So
Yeah,
anyway, I'm holding on to them because I figured there's a chance that the oil and gas market may go up again. But that, you don't have to just have bonds that have a fixed interest rate. You can have other kinds of bonds too that you buy. And I didn't choose these on my own. I worked with the broker, but this broker, before I ever bought anything, he would call me on the phone and say, Sue, this is an opportunity. Look it up, think what you want. And he would never buy things for me without consulting me first. I worked with people in Holland and they didn't ever consult me. They would just play with my money. And I finally got rid of both of them because I thought, I am an intelligent woman. If you want to sell something or buy something, give me a call and say, this might be a time to get in or out of this. But they wouldn't do it. And so I'm changing all my stuff to TIA CREF right now because I don't like it when people just think I'm a total know nothing and just want to play with my stuff and not have any input from me. So anyway, I'll stop now. But anyway, it's just interesting that bonds can be a good thing because they're not always just a fixed interest.
exactly. As both Jim and Sue are stressing, the bond market is a huge market, and it's not that there's no risk. You can have losers, as Sue just illustrated, but overall, over a period of time, we're in such an unnatural time now with the interest rates as low as they are. But as interest rates go up, we'll probably see more activity in bonds. But the fact that women in our era and moving forward don't want to be treated as little old ladies who don't know anything and have to have everybody take care of us. We want to be participants in the decisions that we make. So how many of you understand what Sue just said? You want a broker who's going to confer with you, alert you to things, and give you an opportunity to think about it, and you okay the decisions that are made.
I think this brings up a really important point, that picking a financial advisor is not a trivial process.
Mm-hmm.
You go to some of the different companies, and I like it to an example of a person that I knew that worked in various jobs, seemed to not be able to keep a job, whatever, and eventually went and took a bunch of classes and became a financial advisor. You really have to do your due diligence. And as Sue's example is how the person works with you and how they respect your knowledge and their skill level. Having dealt with different financial advisors as I've lived in parts of the country, it is not a trivial process. You really need to be thinking long and hard about how much you want to participate, how much you know, and what that relationship is going to look like. Because this is my personal opinion, I think there's a lot of amateurs out there.
I agree.
Yep, I agree. And to add to what David just said, when we chose a broker, we did our research on the different brokers within this one company and picked somebody who was highly respected. And it just happened that they were a member of our church, but outside we heard good things. And one of the important things for me, since I don't have time to research all these companies, I still want to have some input. And this person has regular meetings, and this person by chance has just retired, but the person they selected to take over their clients is doing the exact same thing. We have our meetings a couple times a year. We go over things, see if risk have changed. But yeah, everybody is so different. And a lot of us, we just couldn't get into the market till later in life because of where we were financially with our families.
Exactly.
I've gone to buying government bonds for my grandchildren.
I have a question, Linda, from John. What about investing in mutual funds that follow the S&P 500?
I'd like to hear a couple of the people we just talked to comment on mutual funds as contrasted with exchange traded funds. Discuss that.
Well, one of the big issues with mutual funds, well, to answer the question, mutual funds in the S&P 500 over the years, and just looking at that chart that's on the screen, could be a very profitable endeavor, at least for a portion of one's portfolio. Contrasting mutual funds to ETFs is very interesting. One of the big drawbacks of a mutual fund, if it's in a taxable account, comes at the end of the year when you get a 1099, and it basically reflects all the dividends and income and capital gains that fund has realized, that now you are subject to tax on your portion of those proceeds. Theoretically, the fund and your investment could lose money over the course of the year, but internally the fund could have generated gains as a result of withdrawals and redemptions and things, and you'd have taxes to pay even though you lost money. With an exchange traded fund, it acts more like a stock in that you're not subject to any capital gains taxation issues until you physically sell your shares of that ETF. So it's much more tax efficient and taxable accounts than mutual funds are. They're both fine, but ETFs tend to be lower cost internally and more tax efficient than mutual funds. Unless, of course, you're dealing with companies like Vanguard or whatever that are very low cost and very effective that way.
Okay, thank you. And it's, speaking of Warren Buffett, it's interesting to be a Buffett watcher because he came into the public eye, I would say not before the early 80s. I think most people had never heard of Warren Buffett before the early 80s. Would you folks agree with that?
Yeah.
I don't want to tell too much of, I don't want to go into personal stories, but I will for this case. My first husband was an investment banker. And he had grown up poor. He was a self-made man. He wound up in Omaha, Nebraska in his career in the 1950s. And he had taken an economics class at the University of Iowa that used Benjamin Graham as the textbook. So he had read Securities analysis. So in the library in Omaha in the 1950s, he met this other guy that was also combing through the S&P 500. And who do you think that other guy was? Warren Buffett. And he got to know Buffett. They got to talking and he got to know Buffett. And he knew him for the next 5 or 6 years. And so some years go by and Dell's on his own. He and I are dating. We had our first date in 1968. On that very first date, he says to me, "Have you ever heard of Warren Buffett?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, someday he's going to be the guru of the United States because of the way he is compounding money." So I'm just an English teacher. I say, "Oh yeah." And before long, you know, so over the time that we were married, which is about 25 years, we were both Buffett watchers. And sometimes an investment banker wants to not buy Buffett, but be Buffett himself. And that didn't work out so well. But he knew Buffett well enough to fly around in a plane going to play bridge with him at various tournaments and attending the parties that Buffett was having with the group of people that he knew at that time. And so he was still calling Buffett from time to time later on in the 60s to feed him ideas and talk to him every once in a while. So I have been a Buffett watcher since that time. And it's been so amusing to see that as soon as Buffett was a young man making his way until he was, let's say, 50 or 55, people were saying, well, what good could come out of Omaha? How could anybody in Omaha really know what he's doing? And so it took a long time for the gurus to start realizing that Buffett was not a fluke and he did not have inside information and he was not just a lucky guy who had made some big scores, but that he actually knew what he was doing. So as soon as something good did come out of Omaha, they began to say, as soon as he was 60, that he was too old to still know what the market was doing. So Buffett is too old became the theme of the gurus from the time Buffett was 55. And how old is Buffett now? He's 90. And how old is his partner, Charlie Munger? 97. So, as you watch his annual letters from year to year, or go to the annual meetings of Berkshire Hathaway, which I've done once or twice in Omaha, it's just so hilarious to see how many years ago, like 45 years ago, people were standing up at the annual meeting and saying, when, you know, saying it politely, we said, when are you going to retire and who's your replacement? They wanted to know, who do we talk to know who's going to be running next, Berkshire Hathaway next? And he would, you know, it was always, as it became undeniable that Buffett knew what he was doing, now the gurus were saying, well, our company owns some Berkshire Hathaway, so you're going to be invested in Berkshire Hathaway, even if you buy this or that. But he's going to be dying soon, so don't count on Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, that song has been going on for 40 years. So it's been very amusing to watch Buffett survive all that time as someone who, because of the way he writes about the problems, and he has great humility. So he sounds so different. If we just go back to this, look at the way, well, look at the way this guy looks, very severe and very old line, very Victorian. Here's a typical rich man here. This is one of the rich men. And then here's Buffett. Here's Galbraith. And here's Buffett. I mean, the look of Buffett shows that he's got a sense of humor, he's got a sense of humility and balance, and he's really, his father was a stockbroker. Did I mention this the first day? Buffett's father was a stockbroker. And Buffett was born in 1929 or 30. And he had sold stocks to a lot of people in their neighborhood at the time of the crash. So his father just hardly even wanted to leave the house. He was so ashamed that he would go out in public and at the grocery store and in the stores, meet these people that he knew who had lost a lot of money in the stocks that he sold them.
A question from Sue?
Yeah.
Well, just a comment on page 177 in the book, and Galbraith is listing the 5 causes of the crash. And the first one is the bad distribution of income. In 1929, the rich were indubitably rich. The figures are not entirely satisfactory, but it seems that 5% of the population with the highest incomes in that year received approximately 1/3 of all personal income. And it seems like we're going that direction right now. And
It does.
The inequity of the income. And he was giving that number one cause. It said the proportion of personal income received, the well-to-do was about twice as great in years following the Second World War. So we've got that inequality of income right now, and that seems to be becoming even greater. And like when they say you do a tax cut, the poor people receive a very little piece of that, and the rich receive a huge amount of it. So are we heading that same direction right now with our income distribution in this country? And that, when I was reading this page, really made me think about what's ahead for us right now. If the, you know, we can't even think about a $15 an hour rate of income for people, which still doesn't give people living income. I don't know, that this book was really, just really brought that to the forefront for me.
Yeah. Well, Buffett was, not to get stuck on Buffett, but he was one of the primary people to make it, let's say, unfashionable at the highest levels to leave all your money to your children. He once aggressively said that rich people should not leave all their money to their children, because that was just, you know, increasing the problem of rich being way too rich and money not being redistributed. He said at one point that he planned to leave his children enough money to do whatever they wanted, but not enough money to do nothing. So that was interesting. And as I said, Buffett has decided that none of his stock will be sold at his death, that it will be distributed, and he's decided how that's going to be. And his widow will be in ETFs, not Berkshire Hathaway. So that's very interesting. But throughout his annual letters, he and Charlie, in fact, most recently in an interview with them that was last weekend, that's available on Yahoo Finance, Charlie and Warren discussed this same thing we're talking about, whether the market just helps make the rich get richer and therefore is crippling the country as a whole because it doesn't do the job of lifting everybody. And Charlie Munger in particular was very firm on believing that the stock market as a whole, a rising tide lifts all boats, that the poor do benefit from the kind of wealth distribution and redistribution that takes place in the market overall. I think many middle-class people are invested in the market in ways they don't realize. We don't realize how much our fortunes or our futures are invested in the market, even if we don't have an investment fund. Many people who get a late start in investing are able to do something if they do follow just simple principles of value investing and stick with it, invest for the long haul, but not chase stocks in the marketplace on a greater fool theory of just trying to find something that's going to quickly go up. That's foolhardy. And both Buffett and Charlie Munger are very, very caustic about Bitcoin and the GameStop stuff as being just really a dirty way to make money, is what Charlie Munger called both the Bitcoin and the GameStop. So they seem to feel that a great many naive investors are rushing into Bitcoin and these what they used to call go-go stocks, that they may make money over a short period of time, but overall it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the market. It doesn't really do anything to produce anything. It's just a greater fool theory.
Linda, I was wondering, I totally agree with Sue about the inequity between the rich people and the poor people, that's a big factor. But getting back to your Wall Street Journal article and those last few paragraphs, I'm wondering a couple things with the young people coming up in the pandemic time, their outlook of the future, but also how crippled the young people are with their college debt and how that's going to affect the stock market going forward, what they have to invest or don't have to invest because of their crippling college debt.
I agree. And I think the current administration is hoping to promote forgiving up to $50,000 of student debt in order to give people in that young professional age group a lift, that after college, they don't have to first work off a big debt burden before they can do anything else. I don't know if that has a chance of passing. Certainly the tax cuts that took place that benefited the rich more than the poor were heavily criticized by many people in the commentaries of 2 or 3 years ago, where the wealthy just got a complete boondoggle out of it. And it's always the middle class that ends up carrying the burden, carrying the biggest burden in taxes, even though we still pretend to have a graduated tax system. I'm not sure we really do. However, it'll be interesting to see whether Buffett has anything to say in this forthcoming letter about these questions that are so current right now, because he and Charlie are asked about them all the time. Income disparity, though, it is interesting that you see Galbraith is pointing that out as one of the causes of the disaster was the bad distribution of income. So, but his other four are important as well. The bad corporate structure that allowed reverse leverage and so forth, that whole paragraph. And then third, the bad banking structure. So he criticizes the structure of banks. Fourth, the dubious state of the foreign balance. So the trade balance and the relationship between our economy and foreign nations. And fifth, the poor state of economic intelligence. And that last one is what you were just saying, that we've been touching on. The poor state of economic intelligence, where the attitude is, well, the stock market is where rich people play with their money, and I want to get in on some of what they do, so I'm just going to get in and try to buy something I think is going to go up. And what will happen to the people who try to do that? What will happen if hundreds of thousands of people step in and do that? It'll create volatility in the market. Could it have a really, really damaging effect on the market? If a lot of what we could call the raggedy multitudes, people who really don't know what they're doing, they're just trying to get in and get something that they think is how rich people get rich. They don't have any idea of really what is involved. Jim, what do you think about that? What's the effect of, would you say that in any market, there are plenty of people in that market, whether it's a bazaar in some foreign country, there are lots of people in that market who are acting foolishly. When I raised the question a couple weeks ago about whether the government should step in and save the losers in any losing situation, George Borchter immediately jumped in and said, absolutely not. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Maybe George isn't here right now. Anybody want to elaborate on that? The idea that it's not the government's job in a free market to step in and rescue the loser, or is it?
You've got that issue with the energy in Texas right now in terms of should the government step in, whether it's state or federal, step in with what happened with the energy market.
Yes. Yes, that's certainly an example where, as we said, they certainly want FEMA to come right in, but the question will be, will the state of Texas decide that they need to be under the federal wing now in the standards that they meet, like insulating the pipes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, is that after 2011, when they had the last freeze, they had all these recommendations of how they need to winterize the power plants, gas pipelines, and so forth. But the recommendations had no teeth because of the free market environment that runs in Texas. And so nobody did anything, and in the name of making more money. And yes. So then it happens again. And so my opinion about it is the federal government should not have to pay to remunerate, with the dynamic market pricing, because people in Texas can either have fixed pricing depending on who they buy their energy from, or they can pay variable wholesale rates. And all the stories you hear about people paying exorbitant fees were people that were on a variable rate plan as opposed to a fixed rate plan. Yep. So Texas needs to solve their own problem. One, the government, if they want to run this free market, they got to have rules. And so the ERCOT or whoever they are, they should have had the teeth to be able to impose the winterization rules or whatever those recommendations were. And so the fact that they just let it run, do whatever, I think the last thing we as a country should do is the federal government, we should all pay to correct their sort of laissez-faire strategy. They've got to deal with it themselves. The state may have to step in, whatever, but they've got, if they want to run an independent environment, they've got to deal with the consequences. Sorry.
Yeah. I think that it's just a couple minutes after 11, and so we'll just join with me in thanking Linda profusely for this really, really interesting course. And I'll give her the last word, and we'll hope to see you again at a HASP gathering. Thank you.
Well, thank all of you. As I said at the beginning, I'm a little bit of a fish out of water here since this is not my original academic area at all. Yes, I went to the University of Chicago, but I didn't have anything to do with Milton Friedman over there. And this is all probably the way most of us have learned whatever it is that we're aware of. But reading Galbraith was fun for me and really fun to discuss with all of you and hear your thoughts and ideas. So thank you for everybody who participated in this.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Linda. Have a great Friday, everybody.
Right.
See ya.